All right, everyone, we're back. Another episode today. Today, I'm joined by a distinguished professor, Professor Matthew Sigman at the University of Utah, up there in the great Salt Lake City. I have not been up to the Northwest area yet. I'm not really a skier or water sports. However, I've only ever heard of great things in Salt Lake City, honestly. I know during the wintertime, Utah is a great state to be, both for winter sports, but also like I know it's pretty good for like hunting as well, and really any outdoor activities. So I'll have to get up there sometime and definitely check out the Utah campus. I think their sports teams are also doing pretty well right now. I think basketball and football, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I have no idea. But anyway,
University of Utah usually has a pretty good team.
Yeah. Okay. But I guess to start though, we'll definitely talk about your research now and Utah in general. But I actually kind of want to start with kind of your background a little bit, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. I know you did your undergrad over at Sonoma State, which is a little bit northwest of San Francisco. But I assume then you're probably from the area ish, or I'll like kind of let you take the background a little bit.
Yeah, I was born in Los Angeles, raised until I was a preteen in Southern California, and then I went to high school in Davis, California, as my mother was enrolled in a PhD program and ended up getting her PhD in food science at Davis, and then went to Sonoma State as she finished her degree, and I went off to college. Yeah,
that's really cool. So your mom had you, or your mom's completing a PhD. Like, how old were you when she was completing her like PhD? That's really interesting.
Yeah, I was in high school, so 15
Wow,
to
okay.
18, she did her PhD, and and so it was very interesting time in life to watch her do that. I mean, she was a single mom as well.
So. So I assume like you guys were like living in the same house, but like she was off doing her classes or like working, and then you were just going to high school. I guess that's really interesting. Wow, that must have been a huge impact on you for sure.
After school job, of course.
Yeah, that definitely must have.
She's certainly one of my. Sorry, she was certainly one of my heroes. I mean, still is. I mean, she now lives in Salt Lake City in her retirement, but her, doing your PhD with two teenage sons as a single mother is not inconsequential. So, so that's one of the, I think, main kind of foundational parts of my life. This seeing someone work really, really hard and trying to balance life and work. So I got to see that up close and personal.
That's definitely a testament to your mother's work ethic. So definitely, I'm sure you took a lot from that, because I cannot imagine. I definitely wouldn't, raising, teenagers. Well, doing a graduate degree, I'm sure that's not easy at all. So kudos to your mother. That's really awesome story.
I was not easy.
So I guess jumping in then to Sonoma State, well, first of all, actually, your general interest in like the STEM fields and chemistry and, data science, like, was that something you were always kind of interested, even at a younger age, or kind of when did that all start out?
Yeah, my mom tells stories of this as well, but when I was 5, I told her I wanted to be a scientist for whatever reason, perhaps because of her career path. But I had a really good high school chemistry teacher, like many of us, and I also had a good physics teacher in high school. I liked both quite a bit. But a chemistry attracted me initially, and so I was a chemistry major. I enrolled as a chemistry major at Sonoma State. And I also always liked mathematics, all those, data science. I mean, the terminology in the 1980s wasn't really part of our education, but the data science thing, we can talk about that later, but that came on much later, but there's an origin story there. They all are. Yeah, I was a chemistry major from the get out. And it wasn't until my third year in undergrad, when I was a junior, we didn't have much research at Sonoma State. I did a summer in Logan, Utah State University.
Okay.
And where I did research in polymers. That was the story that really got me towards graduate school and beyond. That was such a important moment of my life.
Yeah. So let's kind of jump into that a little bit then, because Well, yeah, like you mentioned, I guess there wasn't much research opportunity at Sonoma State. So what kind of led you to go? Like, what was the opportunity to go do it at Utah State? I'm sorry, what was it? Utah State, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Utah
Okay. Okay.
State. Yeah,
Utah State.
yeah. So it's a funny story. I mean, so I'm visiting mom at Christmas time that year, and she goes, "You need to do undergraduate research." And so I wrote physical letters. You guys will laugh at this, but I'm a little older than I might look. I wrote physical letters to all the local major universities in the West, and the only place that responded to me was PI at Utah State University, who had some funds to a PRF grant to support me for our summer research. So I drove my 1972 Chevy Nova from California, Logan, Utah, and had the most amazing summer experience. Yeah, so yeah,
Yeah, I
the
know you
physical letter, I love that.
Well, it's, I mean, listen, I'm still old enough to know what a letter is. I haven't written many in my life, but I know what they are. I know nowadays they're like an extra sentiment. Like if you really want to do something special, you write a letter. So maybe that has some added
Exactly.
value to it. Um, but so I know you joined, Professor Michael Wright at Utah State. So I assumed then
Yep.
because it was the only one that written back, it was kind of like a no brainer. You're going to go do research there. But it all seemed to have worked out really well for you. You know, but tell us a little about that a little bit undergraduate research. What were you doing there? And I assumed like you kind of lived there, maybe did
Yeah,
weekends, like some hobbies on the weekends or whatever.
you don't want to know. I essentially never left the lab. I was so into this. I thought this was the
Fair enough.
coolest opportunity of my life. I loved being in the lab, and so I remember my first reaction was deprotonating ferrocene with n-butyllithium,
Oh,
and
jeez.
yeah, exactly, awesome. But and the color changes that associated with that, and then quenching it with an electrophile, and in that case it was DMF, to make the aldehyde, and then yeah, it was so much fun. I had so much fun, and taking NMRs, and you know those first months in like real research labs are so again foundational. They give you this sense of making things and being independent and intellectually engaged. And
Mm,
for me, it was a big deal because I wasn't a great student in high school or college, and
mm.
this was something I was actually pretty good at because I was always good at working with my hands. And that was again the connection was being in the lab, being physically active with my hands, and using your brain a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think I've noticed that
So
with many people in general, it's like they may not be the best student like in the classroom, but they do have a lot of or maybe they don't know it yet because they haven't been applying themselves in the classroom. But then they go do the lab work and something clicks in their brain, and all of a sudden they realize that they actually have an aptitude towards it. Um, so hopefully, in general, that's
yeah,
why I
I
encourage a
think
lot of
that
students, especially in undergrad, to at least do some research opportunities. You may not being the best, let's say, in the classroom, but I think you'll if you do some research, you actually might find a new appreciation for it, and then obviously those grades might increase, or you just find something that you like, and equally as important things that you don't like, which is
exactly
um, so
it's
that's really
exactly
cool
my
opportunity.
attitude when now I bring in
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Um, so during that time in that summer, what was kind of the overarching goal of like that summer research that you had the opportunity to do there?
I mean, I think it was my opportunity to know. The way I look at it and the way I always sell it to now undergrads who join my lab is this is a way to try on what graduate school would look like,
Mm,
and also just become better at some technique or aspect of chemistry. And for me, I just totally fell in love with it. I was doing kind of organometallic chemistry, and that's how I ended up in the PhD program in organometallic chemistry. Um, kind of that early days of that space, I got involved, and it was, yeah, it was that, as these undergrad research experiences that are 10 weeks long, and it's really not that much time. So,
no.
you turn around, drive back to school and finish your last year in college, that happens really fast. So it was a very important summer, but it was very quick.
Yeah, my I
Yeah.
had the opportunity, I really guess junior and senior year, but I'll always remember. Um, I got it. I had the privilege of doing it as early as like my sophomore year. So going into my sophomore year that summer, I had the opportunity to do research with he was then going to be my advisor in undergrad, and like I was just living in the dorms and then doing science on the weekdays and just hanging out on weekends, and it was a super great opportunity, um, and I loved it. And so for any prospective undergrads, like just at least ask the question. You never know. Um,
Exactly.
so like
Exactly.
yourself, I mean, you literally just sent a letter and look how it turned out. So, but I
I
assume
know
then that
that was also probably an
I assume then like after that experience, then did it seem like a natural progression then to go to graduate school? Was that something then that was really on the table,
yeah, it was
or
pretty clear to me.
yeah,
Yeah, it was the most clear path for me. I knew right after that experience, actually my grades went up in my last year in college, and my motivation went way up. I knew what I wanted to explore next was graduate school. Although I don't think, as you would agree, because you're a graduate student now, I believe that you don't really know what graduate school is all about. But I knew it was a place I could learn how to be a scientist, and that's
yeah,
what I really wanted to do. Yeah.
yeah? I mean, something that I'm noticing, like you mentioned, I'm a grad student right now, and it's like a lot of it's foundational stuff. I mean, it's not really like it's really just there's so many techniques. I didn't realize how deep this rabbit hole goes. Like in graduate school, like so many techniques. There's so much stuff in literature, and there's so many things to try. There's not enough time, but you're just enjoying it along the way. So at least I am anyway. So it's been I mean, to me, it's been one of the best decisions I've ever made. It worked out for me. Um, but I know you
That's
kind of
great. Yeah.
moving on to then graduate school. I know you did. You went to Washington State, which I haven't looked this up, but I assume it's in Washington State, like in the top left, very top left of the United States.
Yes. Pullman, Washington. Yes. Very, very small town.
Okay. Um, I mean, first of all, why Washington State? Like, what kind of what were kind of the decisions leading up into that area?
Yeah, this is the classic story where I applied to some of the better Midwestern schools, actually including the University of Utah, and I didn't get accepted into them because I wasn't a very good student. And people might think that I was a little bit absurd there, but no, I was a very bad student, um, and for many reasons, obviously. But then Washington State accepted me, and Utah State accepted me, and I decided to go to Washington State. And it was simply the fact that I met this young assistant professor named Bruce Eaton, who I just connected with like immediately. And the science he was proposing at the time was also kind of early stages, first transition metal catalyzed cycloaddition reactions. And I didn't know much about the topic, but I was really interested in, kind of transition metal catalyzed reactions. And again, but it was personal. And I think this is what I also tell graduate students all the time is, the connection you make with your PI and their group is way more important than the precision of the chemistry you end up working on, because it turns
Yeah,
out that changes. But the people around you are the really important part. So
yeah.
yeah, I was connected, and a small research group. Pullman, Washington was a small town, but I didn't think too much about it at the time. And yeah, I have no regrets. It was an incredibly amazing experience working for a young assistant professor, and essentially being a second, third graduate student, and
It
learning all
definitely is
about
a
that.
unique opportunity for sure. I feel like, especially when you join like an assistant professor early on, like they obviously get the 5 6 years to trying to get the tenure. So at least you're guaranteed to have this professor for the time you're a graduate student. So that definitely is a unique opportunity. And I assume, especially maybe like the first 2 years or so, the assistant professors usually, at least from what I've noticed, like they're usually in the lab with you. Like most of the time they're like actually like in the lab doing the chemistry with you sometimes, because obviously they're trying to secure grants and the results. So they're going to be in there doing it themselves too. So I'm sure I don't know if that was the same with you or happened to you, but it definitely is a unique opportunity
Yeah, the
in that
first
way.
day I came, this is my graduate student story. I worked with my PI for a little bit. He trained me. the first day I came into the lab, I made a reagent called CP cobalt bisethylene,
Okay.
which is perhaps the most difficult thing I've ever made in my career, which requires you reduce cobaltocene with potassium metal. And once you've reduced it, you actually have a system which is air, light, and temperature sensitive. And
Oh,
then you have to
jeez.
introduce ethylene into this. And then you have to do a Schlenk filtration at
Oh,
minus 20 degrees. And
how do
then
you
you
do
have
that?
to
Wait, how do you do
crystallize
that
it
then?
and then take a glove box. Ah, yeah. So it's
How
pretty
do you do
cool.
a?
Essentially, you use yeah. So you do the Schlenk filtration under vacuum. You take the Schlenk. I have my hands up, and you invert it. The Schlenk flask. You have cooled it to minus 78, and then you cool the filter the filter uh, with a pipe cleaner on top attached to a spatula, and you're dipping that in the liquid nitrogen and cooling it.
Oh,
It's the hardest freaking step I've ever done,
that sounds like a
and it
pain.
failed the first time because our cooling path broke, and the second time it did end up working. And we made some of this reagent. That, like I said, the hardest thing I ever made in any step of my career, to be honest. So he showed me all the techniques associated with that, though, which in the end, I really loved it because I learned all probably the most difficult organometallic techniques within the first 3 days of being in graduate school. And he showed me all those things. And then soon after that, I was working on my own projects
Yeah,
with my
that's
own hands.
that is a boot
Again,
camp if I've ever heard
the
it.
one thing yeah, I was very, I'd worked in construction in high school and college, and I had done this chemistry research already. I was always capable of working well with my hands, so that came fairly naturally. Now the whole intellectual thing that took a lot longer, so still working on that.
Aren't we all? Um,
Uh,
yeah, I mean
yeah,
that sounds like a. I mean, if that's not a like organometallic boot camp, I don't know what is. I mean, that sounds painful.
it was so. Yeah, it's when you tell your graduate students, it's like walking uphill both ways in the snow. I mean, that's what it sounds like when you hear these stories. But I'm like, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was insanely cool to learn all those techniques really early on.
uh, but I'm sure it was definitely a grind. But I guess you definitely learned a lot of the most difficult techniques like right then and there. So that's, I mean, if anything else, that is extremely useful. But kind of going into the research in a little bit, what was your project that you had done, or maybe you had multiple projects going throughout your graduate school. But I also know you did a postdoctoral fellow, a predoctoral fellowship at Boulder too. So I don't know if you want to tell us
Yep.
about kind of those two little stories and both your
Yeah.
research and your time there.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. I'll tell a couple of stories. I worked on two major projects. One was iron catalyzed cycloadditions of CO and allenyl substrates, and that was a nice set of studies. I got to do a lot of physical organic chemistry, some kinetics, some solvent effects, some isotope effects, things of the sort. My favorite project, though, was CP cobalt um, cyclooctadiene complexes that were water soluble to do cyclotrimerization in water. And this was a result of two things. One is this predoctoral fellowship time that I'll get to in a second. But the other one, it was my original research proposal that my PI allowed me to work on, with
Hmm.
some certainly feedback from him before I got to work on it. And then the predoctoral fellowship was really unique. So my PI, who ended up leaving the Washington State University right as I finished my PhD to go to a company in Boulder, did a sabbatical at the company, and I got to go with him for a portion of that time. And this company was a relatively famous company. It's changed names a few times at the time, so it's called NeXstar, I think, when I first got there. And this was Larry Gold's company, which was the first company on RNA evolution.
Oh
So
wow.
he was the guy who really, defined the field. So what they wanted to do was incorporate reactions into the evolution process, and that's what my boss was interested in. And that's why they wanted water-soluble organometallic reactions. So this
Mm.
water-soluble cyclotrimerization, that's where this all came from. So The coolest thing about being an RNA evolution company, and it's one of my, I think, secret experiences that the poor students around here don't really know, is I learned a ton about chemical biology, RNA chemistry, and also data collection. So this is where this start, I think, even though it wasn't called this is where I started thinking about, how do you do high throughput experimentation and get the most bang for your buck?
Mm-hmm.
And what they do in RNA evolution that I think is super cool that I learned then, and it's obviously that it's evolved, significantly since then, is running the right control experiments, right?
Hmm.
They have to run the right control experiments in evolution projects. And that's because you don't want to have, evolve an RNA that's not actually targeting what you think it's targeting. And so the control experiments are really stringent and very carefully devised in these kind of operations. We probably shouldn't get too much in those details, but they were really instrumental to essentially the rest of my career and how I look at reaction development and also data science.
Well, I guess on that then, because
Such an important that was my favorite part of my PhD
was like
being
the
there. Yeah,
okay. One question on that then is
the
the
pre-doctoral.
is let's say the applicability of, like, let's say really intense control experiments towards chemistry, because I mean, look, I'm obviously not a chemical biologist or biologist, but I get the impression that, yeah, you do need a lot of really good control experiments. But do you think, let's say, being that rigorous about control experiments can be implemented and helpful, let's say, in a chemical, like a strictly chemistry point of view? um like, is there
Yeah,
things to
so
be
if you want to
taken?
fast forward to what I did in my go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was done.
Oh, so if you want to fast forward to my postdoc,
Sure.
I
Yeah,
did
we can.
perhaps
Yeah.
the most important control experiment of my career. Yeah, so I went to a postdoc with Jacobsen,
Yep.
Eric Jacobsen, in 1996, and essentially I walked in the door, and this is one of these great stories. I walked in the door, and I thought I was going to work on metal saline catalysts, and he goes, "Come to this subgroup today," which was their combinatorial chemistry subgroup. And he essentially at the end of the subgroup goes, "Matt, I want you to join this project and help find ways to um, optimize asymmetric catalysts using combinatorial chemistry." And this was the absolute heyday of combinatorial concepts in chemistry and those being explored. So there wasn't really much out there on this. So so fast forward 6 months from now, that time I was building a library of small molecules that we were going to bind to metals on beads, on polystyrene beads, and screen those for various reactions. The reaction I selected was the Strecker reaction.
Okay.
And the design was based on some of the ligand designs that they were using in the lab at that time, although they were evolved somewhat to be compatible with, the synthesis was evolved to be compatible with on-bead chemistry. And so I did this relatively famous experiment in his lab where I looked at um, a single example of the structure, which included a urea and bound to a variety of metals, and also the key control experiment where it was not bound to metals. It turns out the control experiment gave me the highest enantioselectivity and good reactivity. So that was the origin of what is now the thiourea area. And urea and squaramides and all the rest of organocatalysis of that sort was all that control experiment at that time. So we had
Mm.
no intention of that thing catalyzing a Strecker reaction.
Okay.
And so the control experiment, some would call it serendipitous, some would call it lucky. The control experiment was definitely on purpose, and it was inspired by my nice work or experiences at NeXstar and in the RNA evolution area.
So
So that control experiment was run the same time as the rest.
so without any
So
ligand, you got the
that's a circular.
okay. So the
Yep.
without any
Yeah,
ligand, let's say,
and
you best without any ligand, you got the
no,
best
without any
enantios.
metal, you get the
Oh, without any metal. Oh, okay. I had it
without
backwards.
any.
Gotcha. Okay. Oh, interesting.
So that's
Wow,
okay.
that's an important
Yeah. So
point to make.
that's Yeah, absolutely. But that was the control experiment. And, ever since then, we've run lots and lots of control experiments in my lab that were sometimes fairly obvious and sometimes less obvious. But I always make an emphasis on this. And then when you do data science, these controls are really essential in even the data processing parts of stuff that we do
Hmm.
nowadays.
That's really cool.
Understanding that, yeah, I love this. That's one of my favorite parts of, my young career was this kind of taking what I learned in an RNA evolution lab and applying very simply the right experiment.
I guess like
Um,
how common is it then for let's say I feel like a lot of graduate students are super pressured to like get their results in, but like to go, let's just say to take a summer and to do like an intern. I don't know if intern's the right word, but like some sort of fellowship somewhere else. Like, is this really common, or is this like something that grad students should be aware of, like an opportunity to do that?
it is uncommon in my lab. It's become much more common because of collaborations we have with many industrial teams. Um, so I essentially have at least one or two people every year go do an internship, but it's usually on the project they're already working on. But they're going to just basically be on site with a collaborator, usually industry.
I see.
I think they're really valuable for some people, not for everybody, but I think they're really valuable. It's always great to get a good sense of what it's like to be on the other side.
Hmm.
It's always good to get an idea of what it's going to be like to be a professional. So working in a company with a bunch of PhDs and you're the only graduate student, that's a pretty, for me, it was, again, it was this foundational experience where, I got to be, my lab mates were all PhDs and I was the graduate student that followed them around and learned as much as I could. And I think when my students go to these places, they really enjoy that.
Yeah. On
Um,
just your, I guess in continuation of your postdoc at Harvard. Well, one thing I want to pick your brain on because you grew up on the West Coast and then you moved all the way to Harvard, which is on the East Coast. So, um, I'm sure.
yeah.
Well, first of all, first question is, how did you decide to do a postdoc with Professor Eric Jacobsen? And there's a bug on my camera right now. What the? How did you
That's
come
okay.
to do that one? And then just your general
Yeah.
impressions of like the East Coast coming over from the West Coast. Kind of curious. I'm always curious to hear about that.
Yeah, that one will be fun later. So let me talk about Eric. I mean, so I had a science crush on Eric. So I had read every single paper he had published, and I had presented some of his stuff in group meetings. I did one of my original seminars on it. I was, and still am, to be honest. I mean, the guy is problem selection top end, physical organic, essential part of his program. Um, and working for him, there's some pluses and minuses to working for anyone, but the guy is freaking brilliant. And it's, he and so the second reason I chose him was my PhD advisor, Bruce Eaton, was a graduate student of Full Heart. Eric Jacobsen was a graduate student of Bergman, and they were colleagues at Berkeley. So there was also the personal relationship that they had that inspired me to work for Eric, and then also my PI in my graduate work really helped get me the postdoc with Eric. He basically called him and said, "Must take this guy." So then moving to the East Coast, I mean, I was West Coast as deep as you possibly can. I'm a very much a Californian, with the caveat is my mom was born and raised in the Bronx, so a lot of
Mm.
folks probably would relate my personality traits with that. But Boston was something. I mean, it was a hard entry for me. I am someone who is not shy about interpersonal relationships, like making contact with people, like at a bar, say hi or something, and that was not kind of standardized there at the time. It's changed a lot in 30 years. The other part was, the weather was kind of nasty all the time, and I wasn't ready for that so much. But I met my wife to be there. I met some of my closest friends for life there, and I have extraordinarily fond memories of that time because of that. I didn't want to land there in my long-term professional life. The East Coast wasn't really my thing at the time, and partially my wife was also from the West Coast, although she was a PhD student at MIT at the time. So she and I relocated to the West, as you know, partially because we wanted to be in the West, and partially because that's the job I could get.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear when people, especially a lot of people from the East Coast. I've noticed they'll go down to like UC Berkeley's or Irvine or wherever like that. So they change up. They go to like from the Northeast over to California, like SoCal. And it's always kind of funny to me, like hearing about, because I'm originally from Philadelphia, so it's like it's kind of interesting to see how the coasts really are really different from one another, especially like the Boston, New York, Philly versus like the let's say the Salt Lake City, San Francisco, SoCal area. Like it's super different. People are just way different.
Super different. We all. I mean, I think we'd all agree we're all just freaking people, but
yeah,
they're definitely personality of places. Yeah.
No, that's super cool. What during something did you have any hobbies and activities outside of like during your graduate and postdoc time, or did you like? I mean, were you genuinely in love with like the science, and you kind of did spend a lot of time in the labs?
I mean, as a graduate student, I don't think there would be anyone would argue that's pretty much all I did. I understand the idea of work-life balance. I certainly thrive for it in my more adult times. But when I was a graduate student, I was just totally in love with that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, really, intensely so. I worked crazy hours. I was just. I also felt like, and I think it's been this kind of chip on my shoulder since I started my professional trajectory, was I always felt like I was behind because I didn't do very well in high school or college. I don't know. I just felt like it's my opportunity to get ahead, and graduate school essentially is all about how much you want to do it.
Right.
And I wouldn't ever suggest the kind of work ethic that I have or hours I put in was healthy. It was not. And in modern times, I wouldn't do it again. But I like working, and I loved being a graduate student, and I finished my PhD in less than 4 years. So that was also kind of a driver trying to drive out of there as fast as I could. But when I became a postdoc, I had a much more balanced life, even though I was probably still working a lot. I met my wife to be, like I said, friends for life. So I was working hard, but I was starting to figure out a better balance. I have two hobbies that have, I think, sustained through all of this time that are my major hobbies. One is I love cooking. I love being in the kitchen. I love creating things in the kitchen. And especially as time goes on where I'm never in the lab anymore, that's my outlet. And then the other thing is I like exercise. I especially like cycling. And I really enjoy time with my family,
of course,
and travel and those things. But,
that's awesome.
But I think those are I'm not a massive number of hobby person. I mean, during the pandemic, I got into binging TV, but I think that was only because of the pandemic and being trapped in my house. And, you can only spend so much time with the humans in your house before you need to watch the television. But I have two teenagers, so we wanted to go off to our own corners for part of the time. So yes, binging TV, usually sci-fi or something like that. But
yeah.
Well,
that's really it's I think that's really interesting to hear that, like, you, like, especially during your, I mean, still are, but I mean, graduate school, like, you were really into the work. I think it's kind of super relieving, I guess, in some some graduate students, because, like, obviously, like, I'm sure you felt it, like, there's always like the imposter syndrome where it's like, I feel like I don't really belong here, and like you feel like you're I don't know your thoughts on the imposter syndrome just in general for like graduate students, but I feel like it's a lot of,
I think it's
put on, I feel like,
go ahead, sorry,
I say the graduates just put on like way too much pressure on themselves to like get things done, and they almost lose sight of why they originally got interested in the first place.
So maybe I'll circle to the end of that question and come back to the start. I always tell students when they come to my lab, postdocs, graduate students, undergrads, the first thing I tell them is to be patient, because it's none of this kind of stuff is a sprint. It's all a marathon. And, imposter syndrome is totally real. I know I had it. I still do in certain contexts. And I now though can recognize it like immediately, right? Whereas
Mm.
when I was younger, it was just it kind of dominated who I was, my personality, my drive was, for me, for me, and it's not true with, I know everyone, but for me, the way I dealt with imposter syndrome was just to work harder. That's the only thing I knew how to. That's what I knew how to do, and that's certainly not the right way to handle it in most cases. But I did, and that's what obviously paid off in some ways for me. But I think in modern times, it's just so much. Everything is more magnified, and I think we talk about this a lot in the academic world. Is Gen Zs and millennials, Gen Zs especially. I have two Gen Zs in my house. They're both wonderful, but my God, is their life magnified. Everything is just so much faster and so much more frightening. And every mistake you make, every success you have is magnified.
Yep.
So, therefore, in a laboratory, when you're training lots of young people, being patient, I think, is the right way to be, as both as the PI and also as the student, and being consistent and being hardworking is important, absolutely, and thinking about things before you do them is important, absolutely. These are not questions, but how you do it, and knowing that you can't start running before you walk, and you can't start jumping until you run. So these are all things that I try to help students, especially earlier in their time, get through.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone requires a slightly different version of what I just said.
Yeah.
So
I think it's
it's hard. I think it's really hard.
I think you
Go
bring
ahead.
up an excellent
Sorry.
point. I think you bring up an excellent point. It definitely is, especially now with like social media. Like it's just, I don't know, like it is super magnified, and I feel like the way the way that professors may have to secure funding, and they're always on the pressure of like getting the tenure track and stuff like that. So that kind of reflects on the students. So you're trying to where it's, and this is kind of like, I feel like the crutch of this is like one of the consequences and one of the rewards of, like, at least I can speak on in the chemistry, where the chemistry nowadays is super, the bar is set really high. Let's talk about polymers, getting metallics, catalysis, organic catalysis. The bar is set so high that in some respects we're almost like losing the fundamentals, where it's like people are always going for the funding, and like they want to have these applicable for I don't know, pharmacy and applications and yada yada yada, but it's like they're almost like forgetting the fundamentals. And like I said, because professors have great ideas, the bar is always being set higher, so that it requires more of the students. And so I don't know how to, like, I don't really know how to combat this. I just think it's just it's something that I've just recognized. It's not really good or bad. It's just like that's just kind of, I feel like it's just what we're
Yeah,
in right now.
I mean, I would counter that a little bit with, certainly the bar is higher to do really sophisticated science,
Mm,
but we have more sophisticated tools.
that is true.
So that having an HPLC with an auto sampler was such a revolution when I was starting my independent career. It's like, or GC with an
Yeah.
auto sampler. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it actually means that some science can go faster. That
Mm,
said, yeah, I think students have to be more multidimensional now, and it does cost something in terms of their time learning maybe more breadth of fundamentals.
yeah.
And I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. I mean, it's impossible. So how do you find the right balance? Is individualized to some extent. I have some students who really like the fundamentals, and I have some students that like the more applied stuff. And more power to them. That's what they should be working on. They should work on things they're most intrigued by, and connect them to the other part of it if they can.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm lucky though. My lab is, we work on such diverse problems that people. It's like the menu is you order what you want. So
Mm-hmm.
that's not always how it works in my lab for sure.
Yeah, people, just pursue what you really like, and I think everything will kind of work out in general. I would say.
Totally agree, and do it with intention. That's the
Yeah.
thing I love saying to students as well. And I feel like I, as a graduate student and as a postdoc, I was always intentional, even though I didn't really think about it.
Mm.
do it with intention, do it like you mean it, right? And
Yeah.
do it with everything you got, and within reason, and you will be successful. There's no doubt.
Yeah. That's some really good
Um,
advice, I think. Yeah. If anything else, take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and the science will come, and
Absolutely,
you
number
know
one.
the
Yeah,
science will come. Um, just because you have bad science doesn't make you a bad person. So just keep that in mind, and definitely,
that's absolutely right.
at the end of the day, if like you worked hard that day, what more can you really ask for? It's like, so
Yeah,
that's really good.
the term that I like saying is little wins.
Mm,
And my wife and I talk about this almost every day or week. We'll have a little, kind of like powwows, like, what were your little wins this week? And as a scientist, my column worked is a little win,
yes.
right? It can be as simple as that, or it could be you got the right product, or you have a beautiful NMR. It doesn't even matter what it is. Those little wins actually are very meaningful,
Mm,
and we should all enjoy those. Or I rode my bike this morning and didn't throw up. I mean, that's a pretty big win for me, actually. So,
mm,
um, you know, the you know what I'm saying? It's the little wins really. That's life right there. Little wins are life, right? The big wins come because you've had a lot of little wins.
yeah. That is great advice. I
Yeah,
definitely I'm gonna keep that in my back pocket for sure. 'Cause it does change your
yeah,
entire outlook of the day when you have a nice little let's say a nice
uh,
little column or a nice little MMR. It really does change the outlook of the day for sure. So that's a
yeah.
good
You're in a much better place, aren't you, when
mm,
something good happens?
for sure. And then when there's so and so, if you're better, if you're in a better place mentally, you definitely can handle, let's say, the bad things that are sure to come along. Quote unquote bad things, especially at least in the context of a
Absolutely.
chemistry lab, for sure. No, I hear you there. Um, but let's definitely get into your science a little bit. So after, or I guess one last thing maybe you should touch on is after your postdoc, I assume. Well, actually, I'm gonna I'm gonna redact that. The first question is, at what point did you like really want to become a professor? Like, at what point? Like, was there a point, or was it kind of a natural progression, or like that kind of thing? Um,
This is where the newest generation is so different than the way I felt, and maybe even some of us felt back then. I didn't think so much about it.
mm,
It was like I loved I mean, and if you look at my record, you probably know this already. I love teaching,
yeah.
but I wasn't like saying, from the day I walked into the Jacobsen lab that I wanted to be a professor. I didn't think so much about it. All I really at that point still wanted was, oh, let me find a good science project and work on that. And so at some points, I actually can remember two very important experiences. One was Jacobsen had to teach a class, and Steve Buchwald was visiting Harvard for the day. And he comes into my office last second, goes, Matt, show him your project. So I go sit with Buchwald, who was one of my heroes,
That is an awesome
right?
experience.
And I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous. And Steve probably would remember this. So nervous. I'm fumbling around with my words and with my slide deck. He goes, Matt, just relax. And so, we started having a nice interaction after that. And I showed him the science, which he really liked. And I'm like, oh, that's maybe why I'd want to be a professor, actually, is that interaction you have with people. The
Mm,
second one was with Sam Gelman.
okay.
And Sam had come around. He was an assistant professor at the time. He had come around and had asked Eric, did he have anyone who were thinking about academics for the following academic year? And he says, oh, I have these two folks or three folks, I don't remember exactly. And I sat with Sam with the same slide deck or an updated version of it, um, and showed him my work, and he and I just hit it off. And I was like, I think I can do this. I do have a third one, actually. This may be the most important. The
Mm,
third one was I had trained an undergrad, whose name is Christina Spino, in Eric's group. And she won one of these Pfizer undergraduate awards, which no longer exist in the same way, at least. And Pfizer would invite all the undergrads down and their PIs, and Eric couldn't go. So I went as the stand-in PI Christine and for this thing. And I met EJ. I met a bunch of people, even though I'd met EJ in the halls before. And I ended up being on the same train as a guy named Scott Miller. And Scott was a second-year assistant professor, and I think he talked me into it on that train ride. And
Wow.
Scott and I have remained and are extremely close friends since that day. And he's basically said, Matt, you can do this. And I think my major trepidation at the time, which is not surprising based on our long-term conversation so far today, is that I didn't think I could do it. And so once he said that, and I had these other events happen, I was like, oh, maybe I can do it. So I didn't really go in with the intention, but I think at some point I thought, oh, I'm going to do it. And then I applied for jobs and I
You
got
got
a
it.
job.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Those three stories are
I
really
got
cool.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do a lot of transitional
Yeah.
catalysis. So I can only imagine like having sitting down with Stephen Buckwall. That'd be pretty crazy. um, that'd be really
Right. I
funny.
wasn't showing him any transition metal analysis either.
Yeah.
Steve is a smart guy. He's super
Yeah.
smart. Yeah.
Um, that's really cool. And then especially that, like you said, I mean, what a great story. I mean, you're on the train with one of your good friends now that he basically talked you into. I mean, what a great story that is. Um, so,
Yeah,
oh,
and I still blame him for when I have bad days. So,
um, what, and I guess what's really cool too is like, obviously, like, you know, you didn't dream of becoming a professor. One thing just led to another. And like, you just happened to, I mean, more or less stumble upon it.
yep.
It just kind of came naturally. Right. So, it's I think it's important.
Yeah,
I mean, I
I
tell my,
will say, I'll just say one more thing here, and it's
yeah, yeah,
really important. I love teaching.
yeah.
And that was kind of I think that was the instrument that got me there.
Mm,
It's like, I love teaching. I just love
yeah.
it so much. It's my calling. And I think that's what convinced me in the end. I wanted to be an educator more than I wanted to be, a researcher in industry. However, I can see exactly why that's very, very attractive. I
Mm.
think it's awesome.
I think,
So
well, surely, I mean, you probably would admit to this. I mean, like, especially growing up, you had such great mentors. It's like you want to give back now, right? So it's like a point, like, you've had such great mentors over the years. You love teaching it. Now it's time to like give it back and like breed the next generation of like great scientists. So I think, I mean, that's got
yeah,
to be, I would say, like, as like, obviously, I'm only a graduate student. I don't have aspirations to become a professor. Who knows in the future? But like, it seems like I feel like probably the most rewarding is definitely like seeing the success of your students for sure. I feel like that's got to definitely be um, one of
oh,
the best things.
it is worth working very hard for people for.
Mm.
It's very much rewarding for me. I was just at a conference in Belgium, and one of my former postdocs won an award for best young person in the field,
Wow.
and you're like, yeah, this is kind of cool. So you have these experiences as you get a little more aged in the field, and you're like, yeah, my people are everywhere now.
Hmm.
With undergrads, graduate students, and postdocs, it's over 150 people have been through my lab now. So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of folks, and that's excluding the number of students we taught in classes. So,
Hmm.
which is over probably 2,000 for me. So, pretty cool. That's the best part.
So I guess you know, talking about your research now. First of all, I assume like towards the end of like your postdoctoral time at Harvard and with Professor Eric Jacobsen, I assume you applied to a lot of schools, and I don't know if Utah probably. Well, first of all, I know you want to move back to the West Coast. So that was kind of a no-brainer, I guess, in some sense. But and Salt Lake City being a great city, and also stellar science there too. And I've seen as I was kind of researching your group, I was like poising around other departments. I was like, oh my god, there's actually a lot of really cool stuff here. But yeah, well, I assume Utah gave you a great package. I don't know what it was about the University of Utah, but specifically, but I don't know if you would like
It was my
what
only
to.
offer, sir.
Fair enough. Yep, fair enough. It makes it easy. Well, it makes it
Yeah,
easy
it was
then.
my only offer.
Um,
No, it was great. I mean,
yeah.
and it was the right fit. That's part of it. It was totally the right fit for me. The personality of the place, academic personality of the place, very physical, organic, very physical, actually. Henry Eyring was the one who started the graduate school here, and it really started the build of the department. So
As in
this
the
is the
Eyring
Eyring
equation, that
equation,
guy?
Eyring, and so that, yeah,
Henry
that
Eyring.
guy.
Wow.
Yes,
Okay.
so he's
Wow.
yeah, so our building is named after him, and ultimately, I think that core value of physical organic is something that permeates this place very well. Yeah, no, it was my only offer, but it was a great offer, and I have loved being here almost every day that I've been
Mm-hmm.
here. So, um,
Um.
great
So
place to be a
I know you,
scientist and
and
educator.
I know you have. Well, I definitely, we definitely could talk about like some of your maybe favorite like teaching moments and the sort of pedagogy that you kind of believe in, your kind of teaching philosophy. That we definitely talk about that in a little bit. But definitely want to start with like your research. I know you've definitely had so much. You have such a broad research area. I don't really know how to tackle this. I mean, perhaps what I'm personally, I guess I'm biased towards is definitely like your thoughts about combination chemistry and data chemistry, and let's say it's first of all how that began for you, how it's kind of changed over time, and let's say the outlook. Because actually one of my good buddies in my research group, he was just talking about Bayesian theory and implementing that into chemistry because he's really a big math guy. And so, a couple of your works came
Yep.
up, and I thought it was really cool. What's interesting to me is like there's still this apprehension, let's say, from a lot of, even myself, I still have like my doubts because I'm really unfamiliar with the computer science part of it. So I'm kind of really interested to hear from like your end of it. It's like how this could be implemented in a chemistry sense. So I kind of let you take the wheel on this, and um, I'm really looking forward to
Yeah,
hearing from you.
I'll try to unpack all of it, and I'll try to unpack all of it as quickly as I can. I mean, so my young career here was, I would say a physical organic driven reaction development group.
Mm.
Along the lines of Eric's group, but a much more organometallic focus. And so we started in this space. I did have proposals on, looking at structure function relationships of
Yep.
ligands. That wasn't how the initial program kind of, I would say, was built because of the findings we had early on. And we drove for a long time on some palladium oxidative catalysis, and then that expanded into all kinds of different reaction types with palladium and so on and so forth. But it was about 2008 or 9 that we had a group meeting, which was a fallout of kind of yet another experience where we designed a beautiful ligand and it worked like crap. And
That's how it goes.
everyone will tell this, like, yeah, it is how it goes. And this is what I hated. So I hate wasting time. I hate when students have to waste time. And so a lot of my students also really do not enjoy spending months making something interesting that wasn't interesting at all. So we started thinking about, could we use physical organic chemistry, more clearly linear free energy relationships to build correlations and then predict if something would work or not. And we found early on that these would work and then they would break. So there was a nonlinear response surface or a multivariable response surface, which is not surprising. And so it was those kind of experiences around 2009, 10, which really inspired kind of the development of the program. And a graduate student named Cade Harper, who's now at AbbVie kicking butt, he really kind of got the ball rolling. We had a little bit of stuff before that, got the ball rolling in experimental design, some multivariate fits, some more, I would say, expansive parameter sets. And then that led into a number of very nice studies, but I think that opened the door for people saying, "Oh, there's some interesting stuff going on here." And then the next major step function was a student and a postdoc, Elizabeth Best and Anat Milo. They developed the concepts of using, DFT as a way to get features out of molecules to correlate to some sort of reaction output.
Mm.
That was about 2013 when we started working on that, and then it's evolved, as you may know, into a full-fledged program now where we basically evaluate every structure-function relationship on the planet, it seems like. And that's just, I'm going to point out a couple things here for the folks that might listen to your podcast, students especially, is I am not a computational chemist. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a computer scientist. I don't even know how to code. Okay. And I did know how to code. I'm lying. I did know how to code. In 1991, I coded in Fortran. Okay. So we don't use Fortran anymore, it turns out. So, but nonetheless, what the opportunities were put forth is the students in the lab really, and postdocs, drove it. The concepts are extremely collaborative, both within our team and with our big network of collaborators. And we take on, I like saying this, we basically steal from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s as much as we can, both parameter ideas, multivariate linear regression, classification tools, all of these things, Bayesian optimizers, they're very old. Neural nets are very old. Decision trees are very old. These are all kind of rooted in very much, the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So we're not inventing any new data science, but we are applying kind of known data science with some little bits of, I would say, chemist intuition to build models to predict reactivity, selectivity, function. And it's physical organic chemistry. It's just fancier algorithms and dealing with more complex systems. So it's a Hammett plot on crack, is like I like to say. It's that's where the origin of a lot of this work is. We are working now with much more sophisticated things than that, but the students and postdocs just made this happen, and it was so organic. And we reinvented the wheel. I do not know how many times of things that other people had already done, but then we put our own little twist on it. So innovation in this space is actually pretty easy because no one's seen it before in this space, but the innovation in terms of computer science is totally mundane. So, that's kind of the story. And what I really like is the learning curve the students have when they come to my group. Like most of my students, incoming students, are just like you. They come in with some experience from an undergraduate institution, sometimes synthetic, sometimes maybe a little physical organic. They have never done Python coding. They certainly haven't done the Gaussian calculation. And within a few months, they're running. And
Wow.
And it's the uptake it takes time, but it's not the barrier to is not as high as people might think it is. And postdocs similarly so. Most of the postdocs I take in, with some exceptions, have no experience at all in this space, and they come here to learn it. And so it's really kind of cool.
During your time,
I think what's happened in the last 4 years. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just going to say what's happened in the last 4 years is the number of industrial teams that now want to use it is exploding. Because we're seeing the payoff in terms of Bayesian optimization, but even our regression techniques that we use every day. We've been working with all kinds of partners on applying these to real life problems. So that part has been really amazing to me.
I guess I kind of have two questions then, is like, let's say, I mean, like you mentioned, I think first of all, it's really cool that, you basically have you're not really an expert in, let's say, computational and data science, but like you're able to do like all this stuff. And the fact that it was also led by your postdocs and graduate students and undergrads is super fascinating too. It's really a testament to the students, and hopefully anyone that's listening, like, and you don't like need the Hawkeye view from your PI. Like if you have an idea, go for it. But on that, like, how do you have like a rough gauge on like how long, let's say, it would take to like start up? Let's say a lab has basically knows nothing about data science and stuff of this, but to build this sort of like library of like structural relationships or all those kind of data sciencey things you were just discussing, like how long does that take to kind of start up? Could they like roughly?
I think that, I mean, if you're starting a lab from scratch right now, the first thing I would do is I would send an email to someone like me. There's a bunch of us now out there. Say, can I send a student to get trained in your lab? Because I think if you did it on your own, you had no infrastructure, unless, let's say the PI came from my lab or Abby Doyle's lab or someone like that. and has a significant experience, then yeah, you can start from scratch. But if you're, let's say, going to your synthetic lab, and you come from a synthetic background, but you want to implement some of these tools, send a graduate student who's interested and have them come, you know, do a real short course
Right.
on how this works. And we do this all the time. I mean, I have exchange students almost all the time now.
That's really cool.
From all over the board. And I think that's the right way to do it, because it's like, basically, there's no better way than hands-on training for anything.
Right.
We do have training videos. We have a YouTube channel. You might be aware of that. We have internal training videos. We have all that stuff. But in the end, it's basically you sit next to someone and say, what the hell just happened here? It's just like working in the laboratory.
Yeah.
Right. You know, you can be shown in theory how a column works, but you definitely want to know how a column works by watching someone do it first and then having someone look over your shoulder next.
Yeah.
And that's true here. And there's no difference.
That's the
one
truth.
thing I want to say that I love saying is I think chemists can do freaking everything. Chemists
Yes.
are problem solvers, and we will take on any tool we need to solve our current problem. So we'll use everything from chemical biology to biology all the way to hardcore physics to solve whatever particular problem we have. So computational work is pretty natural for us.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we use NMR, which is physically a very complex technique.
Yeah.
And we interpret NMR, which is a pattern. So all we're doing here is, you know, applying, you know, same concepts, really.
That's
I don't think the barrier is more mental than it is actual.
Yeah. That's really cool. I agree with you that chemists can definitely be malleable in so many different avenues. Like because I came from, like, originally I actually did chemical engineering. And so I actually have a dual degree in chemical engineering and chemistry. And
right.
I think
you're almost closer to this game. Yeah.
And to me, it was kind of funny is like, and like, I can get picked. Listen, people want to call me out. I don't really care. But like, I don't think a chemical engineering, like, let's say grad student could pick up a lot of the chemistry techniques, but a chemistry could like more easily pick up the engineering side of it. That's my personal opinion. People want to flame me, go ahead, but that's my opinion on that. But I'll gladly take any.
You can flame me too. I agree with this completely.
Which maybe just, I don't know if you have like cool stories about, like, let's say like a really good example of like your data science, like for the viewers, like how how it works, let's say in practice. Like, was there a problem maybe a company came to you, or there was a problem in the literature and you guys answered this question using like data science?
I mean, obviously we published a few papers in this space. I'll talk about our recent work with Genentech, because I think it's really relevant here. Is we had a collaboration with Genentech on an academic project, and one day I get a call from my point of contact there, who is the director of process chemistry, and he calls me and goes, Matt, we have a data set on a live project that I can't show you the structures on, but could you build correlations to maybe make some predictions on how to find a better ligand? We'll give you the ligand structures, but not the structures of the reactants. And I said, okay, that sounds fine, because I always say yes to things like that, because it sounded really cool. And so we built a correlation. We then did a virtual screen of some phosphines. These are bisphosphines. Some bisphosphines that we thought might solve the problem. We found a couple within the virtual screen, and then they had to have a company make those bisphosphines because they weren't commercial at the time. And then, you know, we made a pretty good prediction and got one right, and we cracked their problem. And wow. This has been published now a year or two ago now, but that kind of feeling of being involved in something like that and not seeing the structures, I think gave my group, and I think the company for sure, like, this is evidence this stuff really does work in the right context. And so we've done this now 3 times with them. And we've done this with some other folks as well. I mean, but the industrial ones are really, you know, compelling, because these are timeline driven. These are real dollars involved. And these are real molecules, really complicated guys usually. And so in this particular instance, it was the nastiest atrope selective Negishi reaction I could ever have imagined. And, you know, we got the ligand right. And now this process is being scaled a variation on the process is being scaled to 500 kilos.
Oh,
So
geez.
that feels real to me. I would say academically, we've worked on so many cool projects with so many different teams, from sensors to electrocatalysts to organometallic reactions. Dean Toss has been just an absolute amazing person to work with on phosphoric acid catalysts. And we've worked with Scott Miller on his peptide catalyst. We worked with, just team after team on things. We've been working with Abby Doyle really closely on different algorithms and way to use phosphines and way to think about organometallic mechanisms. And I mean, I'm name dropping here because I feel like I can do that because that's my life. I worked with all these awesome people, and that's just a few of them. But the list of collaborators right now is over 25. So,
Wow.
and most of these projects are just really interesting.
Yeah,
And
that is super
it's
cool.
one of the neatest things that's happened. One last thing, and I'll let you speak. But the
No.
coolest thing that's happened to me is I was like a hardcore synthetic organometallic chemist. And I'm completely, utterly agnostic to what reactions we work on now. I'm just intrigued by what we can do data science on and how we can do it. And that's what drives me every day. So you walk in my group and people are working on just all kinds of random things, it seems like.
I feel like one
It means I'm
thing,
at school every day.
one criticism that I'm sure you get a lot, and I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on it, is like, let's say some sort of reaction that you're doing, and you need to have a data set in order to like find the most optimal conditions,
Yeah.
right? So I'm sure you get this criticism a lot. It's like, how do you what's like what's like the breakover point where it's like we're screening these conditions, but we have to build a library of conditions in order to build this data set to give us the best reactions. But is there kind of like, if you're already building that library of reaction conditions, you're already, I guess in some sense, finding the best conditions. You know what I mean? So like, what is there? I don't know if you have I don't know if you have
Yeah,
any advice for that.
I do. I mean, it kind of comes back to one of my phrases from before is you have to be intentional about optimization if you're doing data science. And the phrase I love using is there's no data left behind or all data matters,
That's
right? So
true.
when you do optimization in a traditional format, where let's say you look at ligand structure and conditions and stuff like that, you throw away 90% of that data because you just like can't make sense of it or it doesn't fit your hypothesis or whatever. And my counter to that is all those data are physical organic experiments, basically be telling you something. You don't necessarily know what they're telling you, but they are telling you something. And zeros actually matter, and 90% matter, and everything in between matters. So I look at data collection as now always a data science project. It doesn't matter what you're doing now. If you have an intention, so using a Bayesian optimizer, which said you just started learning about, those don't require a lot of data, and it's basically like the design of experiments on speed because it allows you to the mathematics are such that it allows you to explore the right conditions next very, very rapidly. And I can tell you, and based on what I've seen with Abby's group and some of our own experiences and seeing some other papers out there, this stuff works. It works really well. And it's like design of experiments, but much more intentional. If using kind of the regression techniques that my group is more well known for, those are usually done under very similar conditions, but then you're looking at some structural elements. So either substrate or catalyst or a combination of those two, and trying to look at the interactions between those. So how do you judge generality? How do you get mechanism? Those kind of things. That's what our tools have been classically used for. And yeah, so it's mostly physical organic chemistry in the end, but you can use those for optimization as well. So I guess the counterpoint overall is if you're going to collect the data, why not be intentional about it and have algorithms help you?
That is,
because the least likely scenario is that actually that you are going to run fewer experiments doing the classical optimization than if you would do a data intensive one, sort of data driven one. I think I don't know any examples of that. I mean, it's all data matters and you can use it all.
That's definitely a really good perspective that all data matters. I remind myself of that when I'm like
Students
looking.
love that, by the way.
Yeah,
I mean,
Those
students love
zeros
that
do
because that
matter.
means every experiment you run matters, right? So that's
Hmm.
super cool to me.
That's definitely yeah. 0% yield is super important because something went wrong. You have to figure, definitely figuring that out. And
Something went wrong, but you don't know what it is.
yeah, but yeah, your data chemistry is super interesting. Hopefully the viewers can definitely go check out your YouTube channel. Hopefully, maybe I don't know, maybe someone's listening in will want to get taught about this kind of stuff and take you up on training. Who knows? But you guys also do a lot of
Yeah,
other things too, like electrochemistry and enantioselective catalysis. So definitely want to touch on those, definitely for sure. Um, maybe start with electrochemistry, something I'm really not as
sure.
familiar with. I talked to Professor Song Lin not too long ago. He kind of gave me a
Song
boot
Lin
camp.
recently. Yeah,
Yeah, he gave me a kind of a boot camp into his research group, and got to tell you, the more the more I've been seeing this electrochemistry, the more like it's just I also didn't. I guess one thing is I didn't realize how simple it kind of is. Actually, it's not really too complicated. I think people hear about like anodes and cathodes and get really scared, but really actually isn't that too hard of a setup. Honestly, um, but I kind of let you take over a little bit and tell us a little about your electrochemistry area.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, this is one of those examples where one of my very close friends and collaborator, who my next meeting is with today, Shelley Mentier, almost a decade ago, came to me and wanted us to get involved in helping design some organic molecules that were redox active. And ultimately, that turned into a number of studies that she and I worked on that taught my small section of my group electrochemistry. Over the last 5 years, we've been part of the CSOE with Song and many others, but our role there has been kind of integrating some of the data science stuff we talked about, but also we've developed a really nice suite of electroanalytical techniques to study organometallic mechanisms. So essentially what we do is we take a metal complex, we reduce it electrochemically, and then we treat that with mostly an electrophile. So aryl halide is an example,
hmm.
and we can measure the rates really rapidly of oxidative addition. And so we can profile very quickly substrate space as well as cal space, and sometimes a combination thereof, to get interesting ideas of how low valent, mostly first row metals do their chemistry. So when does nickel 1 do an oxidative addition or not? When does cobalt 1 do an oxidative addition or not? And what is the requirements of the ligand and substrate to do so? And so this has been a lot of fun, this project, because it's like back to my roots in a lot of ways. It's very fundamental. The technique is very straightforward. We actually, the first couple papers we published, some of the key data were collected by undergraduates
Hmm.
who both are now in graduate school. And then the data science part of it allows us to do, hardcore kind of analysis of the resulting kinetic data. So, I mean, that's what we mostly do. We haven't developed so many reactions. We do have some nice collaborations with Phil Barron and Sarah Reisman on this, and that's been, I think, a lot of fun for us, where we help out on things or us even do some analysis. I mean, that's kind of our electrochemistry side of things. We also work on flow batteries, where electrochemistry is the key point there, but mostly what we're looking at is stability of molecules that are highly reactive, so they can be used as energy storage molecules in flow batteries. And that's been a lot of fun working on. More name dropping with Melanie Sanford, mainly in that area.
Yeah, I wish pick your brain about that a little bit because I remember seeing like you guys make these like cyclopropenium, right? Um, Molecules
Yeah,
types, right? With a PF6 minus, I think, if I remember correctly. And so, what's the
yeah,
what's kind of like
absolutely.
the idea of um why have these highly unstable molecules, but they have a lot of energy storage? Like, what's the kind of the thought process on that? And how'd you like get into that? I don't know.
Yeah, so oh, that's a great story. As often these things are. But let me talk about what the molecules are for. I mean, essentially, if you want a battery, you want to hit the edges of the battery's capabilities. In a flow battery or a solvent-based battery, that would be the solvent window. So in water, that's fixed. In acetonitrile, that's fixed. And in aqueous batteries, it's much smaller because you can oxidize or reduce water very easily. In acetonitrile, it's much larger. And so we worked in a center called J. Caesar, where our goal was to get to as extreme potentials as you could on both the positive and negative side, analytes and catholytes, or catholytes and analytes, and essentially aim for batteries that could be 3.5 or 4 volts. And you understand that. I mean, basically, if you have a 4-volt battery, you can store a lot more energy than a 1-volt battery.
Right.
So we were working on we're basically seeing how hard can you push a molecule before it dies. And the stuff with cyclopropeniums, why we chose those, they're actually fairly easy to synthesize in a modular fashion, so you can substitute them with the right groups to make them redox active how you want them to, and tune their solubility characteristics and all these other things. The way I got invited was almost comical. In some ways, I knew someone in the center, and they asked me. We were actually out at a conference, and we were walking around running in the morning. Actually, I was running at a conference early in the morning, and he goes, "Do you think your data science stuff could work on this?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I think it could work on this." And I'll get an email from him a week later saying, "Write me a 1-page proposal on this," and that was it. I got invited to be part of this consortium. And then it grew into a really close collaboration with Melanie Sanford, and Melanie and I are close friends as well. So we were close friends before that. So natural fit. And, collaboration is really about fits. So that's been a blast.
That's super cool.
So we've been we have some new stuff we're working on just now. It's to be out in not so long a time, I hope.
I look forward to seeing more about that then, the flow battery stuff. And then I know that the last kind of research area you're into is enantioselective catalysis. I don't know if you want to, let's definitely jump into that a little bit. I think,
OG in the group.
I think, it's about, as far as organic chemistry gets, it doesn't really get more organic-y than, enantioselective catalysis. I think that's kind of maybe that and natural product synthesis are really the top, OG organic stuff. So let you take it away a little bit and tell us about kind of because I know it's probably your first research area was enantioselective catalysis, probably your first research interest.
It was, and that was a fallout of working with Eric. And that I think the part of asymmetric catalysis that is the most fundamentally interesting is the fact that it is the best physical organic experiment. That is, you're essentially probing the relative difference in transition state energies. And so that's the origin story for me. I think Jacobsen would totally agree with that. It's such a great physical organic experiment. Because why do you get 1 kcal per mole difference? 80% E. Why do you get 1.5 kcals per mole? 90% E. Right?
That's crazy.
And what are the structural features that allow for that? How does generality work? And there's these questions that are, I think, pervasive in the field. How do enzymes do this? How do the small molecules do this? And then you just have the reactions in general. People love asymmetric reactions because they're applicable in many instances. And so that's the story for me. And I don't think there's any doubt that I chose asymmetric catalysis because it gives you another readout beyond yield that gives you a lot more mechanistic information. So I am a physical organic chemist, if you haven't figured that out yet. And that's essentially all I am. Everything we do, its origins physical organic, and enantioselective catalysis is the OG in my opinion. It's super cool.
It is,
and I still get most.
It is mind-boggling to me that for a 2 kilocalorie per mole difference makes all the difference in enantioselectivity. Really makes it's just crazy to think about. How little that is. The differences between enantiomers is just like you said, that it is the fulcrum of physical organic chemistry, the ultimate physical organic chemistry problem. That is super cool. I guess
totally love.
I guess as we kind of wrap up here a little bit, I kind of also want to pick your brain about your kind of pedagogy and teaching philosophy. So I know you teach organometallics and probably phys org, but kind of tell us about your little your general teaching philosophy and what when especially when you're taking, I assume you teach the upper level courses for the graduate students. So what are kind of the main takeaways? All of it undergrads too.
I love teaching undergrads. Yeah.
What's kind of like your
I, you know, I,
biggest thing you tell students?
yeah, pedagogy for me is mechanism first. I mean,
Mm,
in terms of how I teach every class. And so you start with mechanism and fundamentals, and then you pull out to the bigger picture. And in undergraduate courses, what that perhaps means is, one thing I often do is weave in a little synthesis, a little biology, a little polymer chemistry, and I weave that in all the time to keep the students intrigued. And I also know when I teach an undergraduate class, and it's perhaps the most important lesson that I've learned in 25 years of teaching, is you're not trying to teach people to be chemists. You're trying to teach people how to problem solve. And
mm,
so the pitch I always give, um, I teach second semester most organic chemistry, so it's the reaction semester. And what I say almost always at the start of the semester when you're convincing the students that they should study is, you ask them how many pre-professionals are in the room. So 70% are pre-med or pre-pharm or something like that. Very common, 200-person class, very common. I love this, by the way, because don't you want your medical doctors and pharmacists to know a little bit about organic chemistry? But what I first tell them, I said, so what do you think you do as a doctor? You take up some quantitative information, some qualitative information, you synthesize that to come up with a hypothesis of what's going on. The only class you're going to get is an undergrad, and this is why it's probably required, is organic chemistry, because we take a little quantitative stuff, we take a lot of qualitative stuff, we synthesize it to make a hypothesis, and then we ask the next question. I think this is exactly the way I teach my classes,
mm.
and I really love that part of it. For graduate classes, I don't know if I do anything very fancy. I try to engage the students, try to do a lot of problem solving in live action, and try to make them do a lot of problem solving in the class. And don't make it too difficult, but make it difficult enough that they have to work for it. And also
Fair
just
enough.
tell stories. Tell stories, man. Like, this is Grub's. This is the Grub's catalyst. How did this come to be? And to any story some detail on that you grew up learning. It's hard not to like a good story,
Yeah,
right?
it makes it memorable
So
too. I
yeah,
remember taking
pedagogy though is. Go ahead. Yeah.
I remember taking when I took Professor Jeremy May's organic synthesis and reactions. Obviously, he knows a lot about total synthesis stuff, and so every time we're doing named reactions or we're looking at a total synthesis, he'd always have little tidbits about the story of this synthesis, and it made it like that more memorable, and you learn a little bit more about like
Absolutely.
those reactions. So it's super. Um, I know when I took organometallics with Professor Olaf Douglas, he's definitely got some stories when he teaches like about mechanisms and stuff like that. So that's super fascinating to hear. Um, people forget like professors are people too. Like they have stories, so like they're not just these robots that maybe some of them do art chemistry all the time, but they have personalities too, and so the stories definitely go a long way.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. And actually, the key point to being I think a reasonably good professor in the classroom is giving a crap, right? You want your students to learn, and you're patient with them, and you come in intentionally every day with a goal of what you want to teach them, and making sure they have space to learn. You're going to do okay in a room.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, Professor Sigman, I want to thank you so much for giving your time today and coming on the podcast and speaking about your research and all your stories. Are super fascinating to hear from you today, and I'm really excited to hear about really all your future all the future publications that are going to come out in the future. I look forward to reading about it, and I encourage people that are on here today to go check out your research area and go check out some of those papers in your future work. I look forward to it. But
Well, thank you so much. This was really fun. When you relive the past a little bit, you remember some of the things you loved the most, and
mhm.
some fun days back then. Some couple crappy days, but mostly fun days.
We have to
And
relive
good luck
those.
with the rest of your PhD.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Definitely was a great,
Yeah.
great time here. Have not regretted my decision at all. But thank you, the viewers, for another episode, and we'll see you in the next one.